video, I'm using my new hardcover sketchbook that I made by hand from a bunch of different paper I already got. This little template I used there to make the rectangles is actually an old Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition punch-out card for some terrain pieces. I kept that so I could use it for art to make shapes as a stencil. Zooming in here, I'm doing a nice little fantasy landscape based on some different references I'm looking at off-screen. I'm coming in with gouache. The type of paper I used for this first page is paper I refer to as May paper. It's old cardstock that's very smooth on one side and almost plasticky and way too shiny smooth on the other. But it's really great. I have it in very large sheets, I think about 24 by 17 inches, and they're excellent for doing lots of different things, including wall decorations. I used pieces of this paper in with the construction of the book. This is, in fact, the first page of the book. I decided to go right in. I got some random suggestions from loved ones, and my mother suggested to do landscapes, and I thought, that's a good idea. So here I am trying to do some different landscapes. I decided to do some landscapes that involve architecture as well, so I could practice doing castles. As you can tell, I don't continue painting one without moving on to the next one, because sometimes it's fun to go back and forth between different pictures and let areas dry completely before going back in with more. I'm working quite thickly with the gouache, and I'm using gentle pressure with the brush in order to blend and make gradients. I'm actually using a fair few flat and angle brushes for this, which is something I advise. Don't just use round brushes with gouache, but you can also use filberts, rounds, makeup brushes, and all sorts of things. I find variety has actually been helpful for me lately. Rather than getting stuck on doing just one thing the same way, I've been trying lots of different things out. Some of these pictures are more based directly on one reference, but I made sure to use public domain images as my primary reference sources so there wouldn't be any issues. While working on this, I was really trying to make sure some areas were the correct darkness and other areas were the correct lightness, to show where the highlights, where the sunlight was hitting things. While trying to get things the correct tonal value, I was also trying to get the colors fairly accurate. But in some cases, I was actually changing some of the colors, so I had to keep in mind what I was using as my reference and what the colors should be. Obviously, I was also simplifying some of the shapes and forms and modifying from the initial castle I was looking at. I took some details out here and there, and I changed a few things around. I was really trying to get the depth in this picture, so I was really trying to get the darker, more vivid, nearer trees in the forest to look closer than the more pale, bluish, farther away trees. I was also really focusing on trying to get the shadows correct on the stone surface of the castle versus where the highlights would be. I was really trying to focus on getting some layers of colors in there so that there was more of warm gray, yellowish gray, and very turquoisey gray colors. I was trying to imply some details in the stones while still keeping it overall a little more simplified. After all, this entire picture is actually quite small. I did go in with a bunch of very fine detail brushes and work with smaller brushes once I started doing more of the details. It depends on what mood you're in and the style you're working in. Sometimes I find one large brush can do a lot, but it'll end up staying very loose. Whereas other times I very much want to go in with the detail brushes so that I can get those little details in there. Don't force yourself to work a way you find uncomfortable unless it's just for a particular art challenge. Try different things and test out all your brushes to see which ones you prefer for different situations. I'm going back in here with much more highlights and shadows and details. I'm using a finer brush at this stage as well to try to get rock details in. I'm brightening up the highlights when I notice the contrast is nowhere near good enough in my opinion. Remember, there can be drying shift in gouache, so you need to take that into account. Here I'm penciling in another little study I'm doing. This one's more directly based on a reference photo, although I still changed up some of the details from that reference. I'm working in with a coal erase pencil. I also didn't double check that the horizon line was straight because I just penciled it in quickly, so in general this picture really is slightly tilted, so you can just tilt your head if you look at it or tilt the sketchbook slightly if the horizon line tilt bothers you. Here I worked in with the soft brush and worked wet in wet quickly and pulled things out to try to get that sunburst gradient effect of the sky. At certain stages, I let things dry, and at other stages, I worked wet into wet and kept going because I wouldn't mind if things got a little blended around the edges. Because this is traditional gouache, so it can reactivate entirely, it's perfectly capable of lifting the layers below to blend things out. My paper is also incredibly smooth, and I find it extremely easy to lift, so I actually have to be particularly careful about lifting while painting. Extra gentle in using softer brushes to put layers on top of already laid down color, as well as working thicker to start with and being willing to let things shift a bit if you go back over top. Learn how each paper you're using works and use its quirks to your advantage, rather than to your disadvantage. I suppose an additional effect of the dynamic tilt is it's quite interesting as if the viewer's flying. I vignetted the previous painting. I accidentally forgot to record when I painted that rock formation, which I mostly copied from a reference removing some extraneous details. Here I'm doing a more soft, wet and wet sky and the far mountains. I'm using a variety of brushes, particularly a soft filberty makeup brush and an angled brush here, and I'm trying to get to the different layers and depth in the picture. I did the sky completely first and let it dry, and now I'm doing the farthest away, most bluish mountains in the distance. As you can see, I'm gently using the soft makeup type brush to add in some soft gradient colors, the cream and some pink. I like keeping some of these more as vignettes. I don't always like trapping things in with squares and rectangles or trapping things in with shapes, and I think vignetting is actually a really pleasant thing you can do, so remember you don't have to put borders and you can let it fade off into the edges. I came back in this case when it dried. As you can see, I'm using a flat brush to put in these evergreen trees because I want things to look more flat and angular. Once again, that's all for this video. If you like my videos, please remember to like, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell to all notifications so you will know when a new video comes up. I aim for new videos every Wednesday, but sometimes life happens and things are delayed. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you with another one very soon.